All right, here we go. Interesting cup. So, good Shabbos. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? So, instead of shot glasses, you have a side of soy sauce. That's. We were out of, I guess, shot glasses, so I went over to Miyako, and they gave me some soy sauce glass. No. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat Ledorotam berit olam V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat Ledorotam berit olam Beini u'bein bnei Yisrael Oti le'olam Oti le'olam V'shamru bnei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat Ledorotam berit olam Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai es hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz v'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam Uvayom hashvi Shabbat v'nafal, Shabbat v'nafal, Shabbat v'nafal, v'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, Lasod et ha-Shabbat, ledorotam berit olam, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei beri hagafen. Amen. L'chaim. Okay, blessing for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kishanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei. Amen. All right, before we get, Mazel Tov, Ken, celebrating 80 years in the world. Mazel Tov, happy birthday. 40 more to go. All right, Mazel Tov. Okay, Torah portion is called Vayigash. We're in the wrapping up the Joseph narrative, third Torah portion of Joseph, and we're going to look today at chapter 45, verse 1, of Genesis, chapter 45, verse 1. We're now towards the end of the story, where Joseph has encountered his brothers, and he's going to reveal to them who he is, which is one of the most dramatic moments in the entire Torah, right? When he says, I am your brother Joseph. And we always point out that that's what the Pope said, right? You know that story?
No.
When Pope John Paul the II, whatever, it was the first Pope ever to go to the Great Synagogue of Rome. And his real name, before he changed it to John Paul, was Joseph. And he walked in and he said, I'm your brother Joseph. So, it took 2,000 years, 1,700 years, but eventually he showed up. Okay, so, but at least he knew the Tanakh when he showed up. So we're going to now chapter 45, verse 1, the original I am your brother Joseph. And then we're going to have the reunification of Joseph with his father Jacob. Now, one of the things that we've talked about over the years is all of this time that he was the second in command of Egypt, the vizier, grand vizier, the secretary of agriculture, whatever you want to call him. Why couldn't he have just sent, with that much power, if he's so curious about his father, why couldn't he send a postcard? Why couldn't he have sent a messenger? Why didn't he look into if his father's still alive? Why did he wait until his brothers showed up? Now, maybe the one thing we know about Joseph is that he's a prophet and that his dreams tend to come true. And one of the dreams was the original two dreams that the brothers sold him in slavery in the first place was because you're all going to come down and bow down to me, including Jacob. By the way, that's when Jacob gets annoyed. Jacob says, look, I understand you're bothering your brothers and that your brothers are going to bow down to you, but you think I'm going to come bow down to you too. And that's when Jacob rebukes Joseph in the Torah. That's not even Midrash. That's right there in the Torah. But so maybe he knows that eventually they're going to come down and he's waiting for that moment. And now that the brothers are here, he says, okay, it's time for me to reunify with my father. But what the rabbis generally argue is Joseph didn't know whether Jacob was in on it or not, of the sale of his sale of him into slavery. Because after all, it was Jacob who said, go down and find your brothers. Well, he went down and found the brothers, and they sell him into slavery. So he's not sure. I mean, he probably has his doubts, but he's not certain what his father's role in it was. Now, one more point before we get into it. Jacob comes down. Remember, Jacob's told by the brothers that Joseph is dead. So now, as a prophet himself, maybe he thought, okay, well, he's actually still alive. Maybe I will reunite with him. We're not sure. But the rabbis asked the question, and I'm not sure if we know the answer. Does Jacob ever find out what actually happened? Does Jacob ever actually know that the brothers sold him into slavery? And later on, once you see that they're reunified, for the rest of their dialogue between Jacob and Joseph, they never talk about it. Jacob never says, sorry about that time, that I sent you to meet your brothers. I didn't know that they were going to sell you into slavery. And Joseph never says to him, by the way, you know what happened to me? You're going to be amazed. There's no conversation. So the rabbis have to ask the question, does anyone actually ever tell Jacob what really happened? We don't know. Now, one final point. We've talked about this in the past. But from the time that Jacob finds out that Joseph is dead, in the Torah, if you look closely at the narrative, from the time that Jacob finds out that Joseph is dead until he finds out again that he's alive, from that whole period, Jacob never talks to God. He has no prophecy. It's as if he's no longer a prophet. It's as if he thinks that his prophecy has left him. Maybe he did talk to God, I don't know. But if he did, it's not recorded in the Torah. Could it be that what? I'm sorry.
Could it be that he was angry with God? How when somebody passes, we gather and we praise God, and maybe that wasn't the thing then.
Right. So the question is, could it be that that he was angry with God? Yeah. Okay. So it could be anything. Yes, sure, it could be. All I'm saying is, there's no conversation. All I'm saying is, he doesn't have any prophecy. What we do know, though, is once he finds out that Jacob's alive, he starts talking to God again. So that's just the facts. Why, I'm not sure. That's a different class. I didn't prepare that class. Carol?
Pharaoh, what would be the repercussion of him saying, I'm sorry for going back, to my dad, and he's in charge? And also, is that that's a lot of people to take into Egypt or to survive during the famine. So when would be a good time?
Right. So the question for those at home was, what would have been the repercussions if Joseph would have walked out on Pharaoh and said, hey, look, I saved you all. Enjoy your food. I'm out of here. So that's what I spoke about last night. And I think the reason why he didn't go back in a sermon that most of you probably didn't hear that I gave last night was, and you can go back and watch it, but he was laying down the framework for what it would take. See, last night I had a spoiler because Genesis is going to end and then Exodus is going to start. And I hate to give away what's going to happen in Exodus. I hate to, but the Jews are going to, don't go crazy. The Jews are going to become slaves in Egypt.
Whoa.
Right. It's a spoiler alert. Well, someone has to set the paradigm of what it takes for the Jews to survive in the diaspora. And that's why he stayed. So I talked about that last night. All right, let's get into it. Now that we know all of that, chapter 45, Genesis, verse 1. Okay.
Here we go.
Oh, there's no mic. Huh.
No mics.
That's crazy. Okay, maybe that one. I don't. Does that one turn on? Shkoyach. Okay. All right, we're back. Annabella, save the day. Now we can have all the feedback that we. Thank you.
Joseph could no longer restrain himself before all who were standing in attendance on him. So he cried, "Send everyone away from me," so that no one else was there when Joseph made himself known to his brothers.
By the way, sorry, before you go on, what I'm most interested in today is the end of this chapter. I just want to, the end of the chapter. I just want to sort of run through the chapter so we set the whole scene. But what I'm most interested in is the reaction of what happens to Jacob when he finds out that Joseph is alive. Okay, so that's what I'm building towards. What happens to Jacob when he finds out, after all this time thinking that Joseph's dead? Not only is he alive, he's making a living. But he seems to be doing pretty well. Okay, let's keep going.
He gave voice to a loud wail, and the Egyptians heard. Pharaoh's palace heard. Joseph then said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father really alive?" But his brothers were unable to answer him. They recoiled in fear of him. Joseph then went out to say to his brothers, "Come, draw near to me." So they drew near. He said, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold to Egypt. And now, don't be troubled, don't be chagrined because you sold me here, for it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you."
So, when he says I mentioned this last night, but in verse 4, when Joseph says, "Come close to me, if you please," what's the one thing he can do to prove that he's Joseph? Show him that he's circumcised. Right? There aren't that many mitzvahs. He can't bring out his tefillin. They don't exist. I mean, they might exist. But his were, he might have left them behind. But the one mitzvah that they actually had, there are only 3 mitzvahs in Genesis. Right? Of the 613, the other 610 are in the next 4 books. There's only 3 in Genesis. So the one that if you're a boy, that you sort of hang on to. So he says, "Come close," and he revealed that he was circumcised. And that's when, they believe. Okay, wow, this really is Joseph. Okay. Okay, let's keep going.
There have already been 2 years of famine in the land, and there remain 5 more years without plowing or harvesting. So God sent me ahead of you to assure your survival in the land and to keep you alive for a great deliverance. So it is not you who sent me here, but God who made me a father to Pharaoh, a lord of all his household, a ruler of the whole land of Egypt. Hurry back to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me a lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay.
Okay, so in telling the brothers that there were 2 years of famine, all right, there were 7 years of plenty, 2 years of famine, 5 more years to go. You've all come down here now, and you're like stalks bowing, there's something having to do with food here. What do the brothers now realize besides the fact that Joseph's alive? His dreams were actually true. Now, those dreams annoyed us, and we thought about killing him because of those dreams, because they seemed, obnoxious and conceited. But do you know what? Not only were they true, but the way we reacted was completely not justified. And wow, do we feel terrible now. But he's proving to them, not only am I alive, but the reason that you sold it, just in case you think that you were justified because I was really annoying, you were wrong. You were wrong. Which is, Joseph, he probably enjoyed that a little. Okay.
It was a long way.
Okay, let's keep going.
You can settle in the land of Goshen and be near to me, you, your children, and your children's children, your flocks and herds, and all that you own. I will sustain you there, for there remain 5 more years of famine, so that you and your household and all that you own are not impoverished. Look, you can see with your own eyes, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is my mouth speaking to you. Tell my father how they honor me in Egypt, and all that you have seen. Hurry up and bring my father down to here. He then fell weeping upon his brother Benjamin's neck, and Benjamin wept on his neck. He kissed all his brothers and wept with them. Only after this could his brothers respond to him. And the report was heard in Pharaoh's palace. Joseph's brothers have arrived. And this pleased Pharaoh and his courtiers. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, do this, load up your beasts and head straight for the land of Canaan, and take your father and your households and come to me. I will give you the best that the land of Egypt offers. Come, eat the fat of the land. Moreover, you are instructed to say, do this, take wagons from the land of Egypt for your little ones and your wives, and convey your father and come. And don't look with regret at your whole household goods, because the best that the whole world land of Egypt offers is yours. Israel's sons set about doing this. Joseph provided them with wagons at Pharaoh's command, and he gave them provisions for the journey. To each he furnished a change of clothing, but to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of clothing. And to his father he sent some 10 asses laden with fine Egyptian goods, and 10 she-asses carrying grain, bread, and food to his father for the road. He sent his brothers forth, and as they were going, he said to them, don't be anxious along the way. They went up from Egypt and came to the land of Canaan, to Jacob their father. When they told him, Joseph is still alive, and that he held sway over the whole land of Egypt, his heart froze, for he could not believe them. But when they told him all that Joseph had spoken to them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to convey him, their father's Jacob's spirit came alive.
Okay, and that's really all that I wanted to. Now, by the way, if you just skip with me if you want to see something really cool, why it's important to me, I'll tell you. If you look in the so the area where they're going to meet is Goshen, right? And Goshen, if you just skip with me to chapter 46 for a second, verse 28 and 29. So do you see here in 28 it says, he sent Judah before him to Joseph to instruct him ahead to go to Goshen. And they came to the land of Goshen. Now, if you look in verse 28 in the Hebrew, Goshen is spelled differently. It's written twice, the same place. In English, it's the same, Goshen. But in Hebrew, there's an extra hey the second time it says Goshen. Does everyone see that? Or sorry, the first time it says Goshen. So, right. So it can be what's called the hey hakivun, which is a directional hey. If you put a hey at the end of a place, it means you're going towards there. But that would actually be grammatically incorrect here. So if any of you were on the board of Beth Am 12 years ago, you may remember this. No? Okay, yeah, so why do I say that? Because this was the verse that I taught in my interview. And so now Goshen, this Torah portion, the stories of Joseph, always comes out around Hanukkah. And last night I talked about the connection between Joseph and Hanukkah and the idea of living in the diaspora and so forth. And so there's this spelling of Goshen here that's wrong. Now, the Torah predates Hanukkah, no matter how you judge it. Whether you're a JEPD person or a Moses at Sinai person, the Torah came out way before Hanukkah happened. Fair? So Goshna, why would it be spelled Goshna? Why add an extra hey if you're trying to connect Joseph and a foreshadowing of Hanukkah? What's Goshna? The letters on the dreidel. If you add a hey, you get Nes Gadol Hayasham. So this was and it was at that moment when I said that, people said, hey, he's from Fort Myers, but maybe he knows something. Maybe he actually knows some Torah. I don't know what Southwest Florida, but maybe, maybe that was the moment. All right. All right, yeah, about?
I noticed that the first time, at least in front of the brothers, he's called Israel.
Oh, okay, very nice. Very nice. So something is, maybe his prophetic powers are coming back, right?
Where is that in?
21, he says, the sons of Israel. So, yeah, very interesting. Now, and there's something to that, I think. But there's
in the previous line, I think he's addressed as Joseph.
Mm-hmm. Jacob. Right. Right.
And in the next line, he said, and Israel said, this is 28.
So we talked about this a couple weeks ago, that there's this idea of Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David, which means the reunification of the tribes, which means this is when, Israel means unity. That Joseph and the leaders are Joseph and Judah, that they're now coming back together. So there's something to that. But I want to focus on a transition here in verse 27. You'll notice that all of the sources that I gave you today are all on the same verse. All on verse 27. Because there's a lot going on here in 27. So let me just read 26 and 27 again, and then we'll get into it and see what's really going on here. And they told him, saying, Joseph is still alive, and that he's ruler over the land of Egypt. And he didn't believe them. So you could see how he might be a bit skeptical. Not only is he still alive, but that superpower down the road, he's in charge there. And he just saved the whole world. And Jacob says, I don't know about that. First of all, he's dead. Second of all, what do you mean he's alive? Third of all, what do you mean he's ruling Egypt? I don't believe it. But then, verse 27 changes on a dime. Right now he believes them. And not only does he believe them, but it says, V'techi ruach. I mean, is there a more v'techi? Chai, live. He's reborn. Ruach. I mean, is there a more like Jewish way of tchi ruach, of being alive? All of a sudden, his spirit returns. Now, what happened in between the time that he didn't believe them and the time that his spirit returned? What did the brothers do that changed his mood? Jay?
Counted everything that Joseph said. Some of the things that Joseph said indicated that he was sold into slavery.
Oh, okay. So he told them the words of what Joseph said to them. But he did something else. What did Jacob see? Wagons. Wagons. Okay? Good. Agalot. And the rabbis are fascinated by the wagons. Because whatever they said, plus the wagons, equals, now I believe you, and I've basically been living like a dead man all these lives because I was so depressed because of Joseph, but now I'm back. And so the rabbis say, okay, it's great that he told them all the words, but it seemed when they started telling them words, he didn't believe them at first. But then you add words plus the wagons, and the rabbis say, what's up with the wagons? Okay, so now let's look at Rashi. Now, first of all, wagons in Hebrew is agalot. Agalot it's a wagon. A agal in Hebrew is anything really, that goes along with wheels, like a shopping cart or something. But have you ever heard the golden calf in Hebrew? Egel hazahav. Agalot plural. Egel singular. Egel hazahav. Zahav gold. Egel calf. Agala and egla is also a calf. Okay? So there's something going on with that word egla and an animal that Joseph was sending his father a signal with the wagons. Now, how would Jacob know the wagons was a signal? Okay, so Rashi explains. Edith, would you mind reading the Rashi there? All the words of Joseph?
All the words of Joseph. As evidence that it was Joseph who was sending this message, he had informed them of the religious subject he had been studying with his father at the time when he left him. The section of the heifer that had its neck broken. It is to this that Scripture refers the words, and he saw, that is, comprehended the meaning of
Agalot.
the agalah, here to be taken in sense of heifer, which Joseph had sent, and it does not state which Pharaoh had sent.
Okay, good enough. And then you could see the spirit of Jacob, their father, revived, meaning that the Shekhinah, God's presence, that departed from him when he found out that Joseph died, now came back. So what Rashi's saying is, Utechi Ruach, his spirit was revived, means he was a prophet again. He now believed, he was always a prophet, but now he actually believed that once again he could connect with God, God's spirit. Okay, now, there is a mitzvah. We did this last year, not too long ago, when we were in Deuteronomy. We talked about the Egla Arufa. Now, one of the 613 mitzvahs is the Egla Arufa. What's the Egla Arufa? So let's say there's a dead body that's found in between cities, out in the wilderness. So here it would be, like if you went right down here, there's one corner there where South Miami, Coral Gables, and Pinecrest meet. Right there, if a dead guy was right there and you weren't sure, did he die in Pinecrest, South Miami, or Coral Gables? It's not exactly like that. It's more like there's a city here, and then 20 miles over there, there's a city there, and somewhere in between. So the rabbis would go out according to Deuteronomy 21, and they would measure which city is he closest to. And they say, okay, he's closest to Pinecrest. So the mayors of Chelm would come, the mayor of Pinecrest would come. Some of this is good material. Would come out. You know Chelm? Chelm is what the professors at Hebrew Union College call rabbis, that they ordain. Because we don't have PhDs, so we don't know as much as them. One thing we know about more than them is how to be a rabbi. But, all right, doesn't matter. So they would measure to the body, and then the heads of the court, the chief rabbis would come out, the high priest, whatever, and come out, and they would sacrifice an animal, the eglah. And they would break its neck, and that would be like a sacrifice. And the sacrifice would be to say, we don't know who killed this guy, but we're absolved, our city is absolved from killing him, and we're doing this sacrifice because we don't know who killed him. But there's also included in that an admission of guilt, that someone should have been watching him, that we should have paid more attention, and that people who travel to our city have the right to assume that we're going to watch over them so that they can travel and be safely to get to their next place, and we didn't do that. Okay. In any event, what Rashi's saying is, whatever that mitzvah, don't worry about that mitzvah, but at the time that I left and went to see my brothers, you and I were studying that section of Torah. You, Jacob the prophet, knew all of the mitzvahs because God, you learned all the mitzvahs from Isaac and from Abraham, who learned them from God, or Shem or Ever and the movie reviewers. And you learned them and you taught them to us. And we were studying this section of Torah at the time that I left you. So when Jacob sees the agalot, he said, I don't care what the brothers say, but seeing the wagons, agalot, he put together, Joseph sent me this sign. Now you have to be a pretty smart guy to have recognized that. But, if you were in the CIA or something, you have that kind of training, you look for the signals and so forth. Okay. I've been watching The Agency, so I'm into, and Black Doves. You see these movies? These are, every show now is about the CIA. Okay, but if you want Judy's opinion, it's terrible. It's terrible. I was going to tell you that I liked it, but now I'm going to tell you I hate it because Judy said it's not good. All right. I highly don't recommend. No, all right. Okay, Chizkuni. 1200s France. So let me just make this point. We're now getting to the point where, in this class, where I no longer hold out hope that anyone else is going to come. I realize it's just you guys. Right? Every week I go, so maybe we'll get some more people. But the good thing about that is, you guys who do come have become experts. And you're so far, that you're to the point where you know that when you read Rashi, you say, Rashi is the jumping off point for what's really going on here. Okay? Rashi is just pointing you he's not telling you the answer, he's pointing you in the right direction. Chizkuni is going to give us now the next layer of what Rashi's saying. By the way, it wouldn't kill you to say to a friend, what are you doing Saturday morning? There's room. There's room. Okay. But okay, whatever.
Turn off the video, you'll see a lot.
Yeah, okay, hi at home. And if you haven't signed up for Beth Am University, although you probably are the ones who have, this Wednesday is the first one. So it's not too late. There's plenty of room. Okay. Chizkuni. Judy, would you mind reading there? A little French commentary.
You'll have to help me with the Hebrew.
Yeah, you can skip that. It means that Joseph had sent.
Yaakov reasoned that if the sender had not been my son, No one else could have gone to the trouble to send me carriages to be riding in on my journey. Oh, wait, I'm having vision problems here this morning. Rashi adds that the consonants in the word
Agala.
agala have a dual meaning. They can mean egla, a heifer, or they can mean agala, carriage. Joseph wished to remind his father that the last subject that they had discussed together were the laws pertaining to the heifer that is thrown off a cliff to atone for a murder committed by persons unknown.
Okay, so if you were Chizkuni, if you were this great rabbi who lived in France about 200 years after Rashi, why would you write a Torah commentary? Rashi's already there. Why do you need to write another one? Rashi already did it. So what Chizkuni is saying here, and what a lot of rabbis, including Nachmanides, do, is they say, okay, I read Rashi. Here's what Rashi says. But you know what? I have all of these students, and they ask me, what did Rashi mean by this? So I started explaining, here's what Rashi meant by this. And then someone at some point wrote down what I said. And after a while, they had written down everything that I said about the whole Torah, and that became a commentary called Chizkuni. That's usually how it works. So this is now him explaining to his students, or the Jews who showed up at his Torah study. By the way, one of you should be every week, Rabbi Barrett says this, and then just publish it and call it Barrett. Right. But the problem is I don't have any thoughts of my own. I'm just taking what these guys say. The thing about Chelm, that was me. That would be the only part that you. Okay. Okay. So here's now what he's saying. Here's what Rashi meant. So the first thing we know, the only thing we know about Rashi so far is that Rashi said Jacob knew that it was Joseph because he sent the carriage, and the carriage reminded him of what we'd last been studying. And Chizkuni is basically saying to you, you think that's all there is? You think that's what, there's more to the story? Okay, now, one of the things that he mentioned so far is, right off the bat he said, Jacob reasoned that if the sender had not been my son, no one else would have gone to the trouble to send me the carriages. They would have said, look, get on your camel and ride over, or schlep over like everyone else. But I'm sending you this fancy carriage. Okay, keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. Okay, let's keep going. So now we're up to...
If you were to ask.
Okay.
All right, if you were to ask how the carriages were a memorable symbol of their discussion, when the Torah reports Yaakov as having accompanied Joseph part of the descent from the mountain on which Chevron is situated, Joseph is reported to have said to him that he should go back. In other words, there could not have been a connection to the subject of the Eglah Arufa, where our sages assume that the murdered person had not been accompanied, or that he would have become the object of murder. His father had then told him that the subject of accompanying a departed guest would rank highly in the Torah in the future. The reason that Joseph reminded him of that was that it was something to which no one else could have been privy.
Okay, so what he just said there was very profound. So whether or not they were studying Eglah Arufa or not, they might have been. Doesn't matter. But at some point, Jacob taught Joseph, what is the story of Eglah Arufa? Now, the story of Eglah Arufa is some guy died while he was traveling from one city to another. And the high priests or the chief priests of that town need to schlep out to where that happened and offer a sacrifice absolving their city of that sin, really repenting from that sin. What did that city do wrong? It's not their fault that guy went out there and someone killed him. So the Torah says, yes, it is. Because what they should have done is they should have gone out, someone from that city should have, listen to this word, livui, escorted in Hebrew. They should have escorted him to the city limits and proclaimed that this guy is with us. And if anyone does anything to this guy, they're messing with our whole city. And in that that meant that nobody would mess with him. But we didn't do that. We didn't escort him properly. And what does Joseph send to Jacob? Wagons. To do what? Who would travel in a fancy wagon? Only somebody. Who has these fancy wagons? Only the king. So if you're in a fancy wagon, no one's going to mess with you because they know you're with the king. So how is Jacob realizing that Joseph that this has to be Jacob? Look what Cheskuni says. Jacob reasoned that if the sender had not been my son, no one else other than Joseph would have gone out to the trouble to send the carriage, because nobody else knows that mitzvah of how important it is to do livui, to do escorting. So two things happened. One, Jacob realized that Joseph's still alive, but that's not really what revived his spirit. What revived his spirit? He still remembered the lessons of Torah that he learned from Jacob. He was still a Jew. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, right, it's a Torah that hasn't been given yet, but the tradition is that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as prophets, knew the mitzvahs. And we see some examples of that, right? For example, we see Lot eating matzah on Pesach. Now, why was he eating matzah on Pesach? Because the mitzvah isn't eat matzah. The command isn't eat matzah in the Torah because the Jews were taken out of Egypt. The command is eat matzah on the 15th day of Nisan. That's one of the 613 commandments. So Lot said, hey, you guys know what today is? 15th of Nisan. Get out the matzah. I'm gluten-free. We have that now. I don't know how the conversation went. Video's grainy. So we eat matzah because God took our people out of Egypt. Lot ate matzah because God is going to take his people out of Egypt. Either way, that day, you have to eat matzah. So the rabbis say, well, how did he know that? And the Torah says, well, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob knew the mitzvahs. Okay. And there are more examples. There are more examples of them following mitzvahs that hadn't been given yet.
Something
This is one of
occurs to
them.
me, just in present day, what happened in New Orleans, we're blaming the people of New Orleans or the police of New Orleans or whatever who was in charge of keeping people safe. Rather than just blaming the guy who committed the
Right.
terrible crimes, they're looking to the community to protect.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, it's true. This is a terrible situation. By the way, the daughter of one of my members in Fort Myers goes to the University of Georgia. She's one of the people that was hit, and she's in the hospital. She didn't die, but she's in the hospital. And also two Israelis were injured. I mean, horrific. Okay, two more Meforshim, two more commentaries here. Nachmanides, the Ramban, if you look on the back of the page. I'm sorry, what was your name? Diana. Would you mind reading the Ramban?
And they told him all the words of Joseph. It is my opinion, in line with the plain meaning of Scripture, that it was never told to Jacob throughout his entire lifetime that the brothers had sold Joseph.
Right, okay, so remember I asked that question in the beginning. Did Jacob ever actually know what really happened with the sale of Joseph? Okay.
Rather, he thought that Joseph had strayed in the field, and those who found him took him and sold him into Egypt. The brothers did not want to tell him of their sin, being afraid for their lives, lest he be wroth and curse them as he did to Reuben.
Okay, hang on one second. So, hopefully, Shelly will take it.
That sounds like they're putting it in the closet.
So, by the way, what's going on out there, I'll tell you. I don't know why it has to be on Shabbat, but we're redesigning the Holocaust Plaza. And it was part of the Beyond the Curve, and it's basically the last thing. Everything else, the other buildings, in case you were wondering, they're done. The building, right? That's funny because they're done for 2 years. But I don't know. We're finishing now the Holocaust Plaza. For some reason, there was a delay. It's going to be gorgeous when they're done. You can already see in the next week or so it should be done. On January 27th, we're having the inauguration. January 27th is International Holocaust Remembrance Day, and we're having a ceremony. It's going to be very powerful. A variety of Holocaust survivors are going to be speaking. And we just found out that the mayor of Jerusalem is going to be there. Moshe Leon, he's going to be here. And we were able to get the mayor of Jerusalem. I don't know yet if we're going to be able to get the mayor of Pinecrest. We're working on that. But we did get the mayor of Jerusalem. So hopefully the mayor of Pinecrest will be here too, but the mayor of Jerusalem will definitely be here. So put that on your calendar. January 27th is going to be a very emotional and moving ceremony. Okay, let's start over with the Ramban.
Okay.
Or well, at
Or
least
I could do the brothers. No, is that where the noise started? I don't know.
wherever.
Yeah. Okay.
Wherever you feel like
All
it.
right. The brothers did not want to tell him of their sin, being afraid for their lives, lest he be wroth and curse them, as he did to Reuben, Simeon, and Levi, while Joseph, in his good ethical conduct, did not want to tell him.
Right, so there's a lot riding on this. Because if you're one of the brothers, you're one of the 12 tribes. And if you're one of the 12 tribes, in one more Torah portion, Jacob's going to give a blessing for your tribe that's going to go on forever. And Reuben, Simon, and Levi have different sins that are going to echo for eternity. Although Levi is going to make up for it with some good deeds later on in the Torah. But Reuben and we said before that the Mashiach and the leaders are Judah and Joseph. Well, normally you would say, why isn't it the oldest brothers, Reuben and Simon? But because of their sins, they got left out, and so it went to other brothers. So the brothers are really nervous about their spiritual inheritance. Okay, so plus it's a little hard to admit to your father you sold your brother. It's not the easiest thing. By the way, you know where Joseph's really been? We sold him into slavery, but the good news is we didn't kill him. We could have killed him. We didn't kill him. Okay. All right. Okay, so let's keep going.
It is for this reason that it is said, and they sent a message unto Joseph, saying, thy father did command before he died, etc. And had Jacob known of this matter, it would have been proper for them to plead before their father at the time of his death to command Joseph by word of his mouth, for he would have granted his father's request and not rebelled against his word, and they would not have been in danger, nor would they need to feign words out of their own hearts.
All right, so the reason that I brought this Nachmanides is really to point out that we don't know what Jacob knows or doesn't know, but it seems like he never knew about the sale of Joseph, and that he never talked about it with Joseph during his life. Erica?
Joseph going to the father and saying, look at all of what they did, would not also have been counterintuitive to what he said to them when he identifies himself as such and he said, forget to some degree what you did, because actually this was God's plan.
Right.
So it was more like, I don't want to go back and blame you for what you did, because I now see that there's a divine cause to it or something I don't understand.
Okay, so you bring up a very interesting point. Why? Because Joseph's response to the brothers is, don't worry about it. This was God's plan. But you know what Joseph never does? Forgives them. He never forgives. He says, okay, fine, you did this, don't worry, it worked out. But he never says, I forgive you, which is interesting. All right. So you could ask, did Joseph ever forgive the brothers? And the answer is, I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Did they ever ask for forgiveness?
I don't think so. Jay and then Eileen?
Rabbi, I have to disagree with you. There's not a lot of words in the Torah, and it says that they told brother Joseph, who you sold into slavery in Egypt. And they are recounting when Judah is talking to Joseph and saying, hey, Joseph, don't take Benjamin, take me. He recounts every word that his conversation was with his father. So why wouldn't they say to Jacob, when they're saying all the words, and he revealed himself to us and said, I am your brother Joseph, who you sold into slavery in Egypt. And then they didn't discuss it, but it seems to me like they told him. And Joseph also said, that was a good thing, because it saved everyone's lives.
So look, it's a fair point. I'm taking my cue from Nachmanides. Nachmanides, look. 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 Between you and Nachmanides, who's a better litigator? He lost the disputation, and had to flee Spain because he lost the disputation to Pablo Cristiani. So, you seem to be doing pretty, No, but Nachmanides says they were afraid to tell their father. So, look, if you're the brothers and you go to Jacob and you have to say, okay, Joseph's still alive, here's what he said to us. There is this one line that said, I'm your brother Joseph who sold you into slavery. Nachmanides said they were afraid to tell Jacob that.
Why didn't Joseph?
Again, the video's grainy of what they, so you could argue that. I was just sort of going along with Nachmanides, but what I think the rabbis pick up on is that it's weird in the Torah that Jacob and Joseph never talk about the sale. And Jacob never comes to Joseph and says, I should have protected you more, I should have watched over. And by the way, and maybe you're picking up on something very interesting. The wagons seem to have a tremendous influence. The rabbis believe that the wagons have a tremendous influence, that there's a big point to the wagons. But the point of the wagons is escorting. And escorting, I'm sending you these wagons so you come down to Egypt and nobody messes with you. But you know what? When I went down to Egypt, everyone messed with me because you didn't send me with any wagons. And maybe Joseph's saying, I'm watching over you better than you watched over me. Which is kind of chutzpah to say to your father, but he's been through a lot. I don't know, that's, that you can put, if you want to write that down and publish it somewhere and say that's Barris. I didn't steal that from anyone, I made that up myself. But Eileen? Yeah.
Going back to whether Joseph forgave his brothers, but he said, don't worry about it. It strikes me about the power of words.
Okay.
We talk about all the words of Joseph, Rahab does, the words of Joseph and the power of words. So it's interesting because, hey, don't worry about it. Is forgiveness. But he didn't say, I forgive you. So it's kind of interesting how
Exactly.
about the power of words again.
Right, and I think the rabbis pick up on that, and there's a lot to discern there about our own behavior. Like if someone says to you, I'm sorry I did that, and you say, it's fine. Yeah. So, well, what does that mean? Do you forgive me or not? That's fine. Like when you ask your wife, how you doing? Fine. That's when you know it's not fine, right?
I was going to say that maybe there was an understanding between Joseph and
I'm sorry, I can't. Okay, can we pass them? Yeah, then the people at home can hear you if you use the mic.
I was going to say that maybe there's an understanding and understood his gifts, his dreams, and so
Very nice. Yeah, very nice. Good point. Good point. Was there another hand? Someone? Okay, Judy, and then Bobby, and then we'll wrap up.
Just thinking about fathers and sons talking to each other. Abraham and Isaac never discuss what happened between them. And here again, we have a father and son where horrendous things happen,
Yeah.
and they really don't talk about it.
Yeah, there's a rabbi named Moshe Twersky, who, Orthodox rabbi, contemporary rabbi, and he's not only a rabbi, but he's also a psychologist, and he wrote a commentary on the Torah based on the psychological principles. It's fascinating. If you want to look at that, you can look at these kinds of things. It's called Twersky on Chumash. You can get it at artscroll.com. It's a huge book. But it's really interesting. Twersky? Maybe. Oh, maybe, yeah. Or is it Avraham Twersky? There were a few Twerskys, I forget. But Twersky on Chumash is one of the few Torah commentaries that's mainly from a psychological perspective, and it's fascinating. I should use it more often. I just want to conclude with oh, Bobby, you had a...
Quickly,
sorry.
It seems to me that it's logical to conclude that if he told his brothers, he wanted to tell his brothers, he would also tell his father. It's easier to conclude that he told them rather than they told their father or the father asked, because they looked up to him in awe, and he's the one who had control of the paradigm,
Right.
not them.
Interesting. Good point. A lot of good points. Okay. So the Kli Yakar, final... by the way, this is when people study this section of Torah, the Kli Yakar is usually the one they go to. This is the famous commentary here. And it's much longer. I just brought a little part of it. But he said, when Jacob saw the carts, the agalot, so this site is a matter of observation. Because Jacob looked at what he was told that Joseph did according to the law and escorted the wagons. By this Jacob knew that he was Joseph, because there is no one who does good in all of the land of Egypt, not even one who keeps the watch of God. Therefore the spirit of Jacob, their father, lived. But from the things that there is no evidence of Joseph's name in their mouths, because Joseph taught this law to others, but he took evidence from this act. It's not a great translation there. But what the Kli Yakar is trying to say is, one thing that Jacob knew about Egypt was it was the den of idolatry. It was a place where you go is the opposite of living Torah. And one of the fears that he had he must have had a great fear of sending his sons down to get food in Egypt. Because if you remember what happened with regard to Egypt earlier in the Torah, Abraham went down to Egypt, and God got mad at him. And terrible things happened, and Sarah was, abducted, and later on, Isaac, there's a famine, and Isaac is going to go down to Egypt, and he gets to the border, and God says, don't make the same mistake your father did, don't leave. So now Jacob is in the same position. And he says, look, we have no choice, there's no food. What was the difference, though, between the point where the famine happened to Isaac and the point and when the famine happened to Jacob? Isaac goes to the border, and God comes to him and says, don't cross the border, stay in Israel, don't make the same mistake that your father did. Now, Abraham never had a paradigm, he didn't know. Okay, he learned the hard way. Jacob sees the famine, but Joseph has been sold into slavery, and he doesn't have prophetic powers anymore. So he doesn't know what to do. And he can't rely on God the way Isaac did, because God doesn't come to him the way he came to Isaac, because he's not talking to God anymore. And so he sends his sons down to Egypt. And his sons come back from Egypt with a story and with wagons and with something that allows his faith in God to return, right? His spirit, with chiruach, and his spirit returns. And now he starts having conversations with God again. And what does he realize? He realizes that not only has his prophecy returned, but the prophecy that he passed on to Joseph is working, because Joseph's dreams came true. So Jacob had to wonder. Here's why the spirit returns when he hears this story. Two things Jacob had to wonder. Am I ever going to talk to God again? Does my family have a relationship with God anymore? And do I have the power to pass it on to the next generation? Because I had this one son who had vision like I did. But I don't know what, he died, and I don't know if his vision's ever going to come true. And now all of a sudden he hears the vision he had about the stalks and the food and all that. What did you say his job was again? Secretary of Agriculture? He's in charge of the food? Oh my goodness. The Torah that I taught him worked. And he wouldn't have prophecy in Egypt, which is like the den of idolatry, if he got to Egypt and became an idolater. Which means that everything that I wanted to pass on worked. Not to you Shlemiels, Reuben, Simon, whoever, but the one that I gave the coat to, it did work. And so now that's what caused his connection to God. So, I think that part of the message here is, how do you know? So there's a teaching in the Talmud that says you can't go to heaven based on the performance of your parents, but you can go to heaven based on the performance of your kids. In other words, if you've passed Torah down to someone and it's working, then you've done a good job. Just because your parents were great, what have you done? That merit doesn't follow you. But if you've passed it on and your kids are living a moral life, then that means something. And this was the moment where Jacob said, maybe I wasn't such a bad father. Maybe something, because look at these guys. These guys are terrible. But maybe something about Torah is actually being passed down. And we get all of that because Joseph sent a wagon, which is pretty cool. Judy?
What Torah did Jacob have?
Okay, so we covered that. But the idea was that he was a prophet. And that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, remember the thing I was talking about with the matzah? Right, so the reason that Lot was eating matzah, the understanding is that, and this is a great deal of conversation among the rabbis, but that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah knew the mitzvahs. Now, I'll give you one interesting example. So, one of the mitzvahs, and this is a tremendous conversation with the rabbis, one of the mitzvahs is you're not allowed to marry two sisters while they're still alive. If you're married to a woman and then she dies, you can marry her sister. But if they're both living at the same time, you can't be married to both of them. This was back when you were allowed to be married to more than one person, which, by the way, lasted until Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg, I think 1200s or 1100s. Why did Jews stop doing polygamy? Because the Christians stopped, and the Jews said, doesn't look so good, right? Right. So that's why we stopped, because you have levirate marriage. It was legal. There's only one state anymore. All right, doesn't matter. So you have a problem with Jacob, because he marries Leah, and then he marries Rachel. And so if you ask the question, I thought they knew the mitzvahs. Gesundheit. So the answer is, he married them in the diaspora. And the matriarchs and patriarchs only had to follow the mitzvahs when they were in the land of Israel. Well, when they get to the border, when they come back to Israel, who did he marry first? Leah. So that marriage is kosher. Then he married Rachel. He shouldn't have done that. He was allowed to marry Leah. But then he marries Rachel. When they come back and they get to the border of Israel, Rachel dies right at the border and can't go in. Why? Because that marriage isn't kosher in the land of Israel. And it didn't work. Okay. So there are plenty of other examples in the Torah. If you're not interested in that, then you can walk out of here and say, yeah, that's midrash. I never believed in that stuff anyway. That's fine. But the idea here, another example is, and this is what the rabbis are working on, the wagons meant something. Now, why did they connect the wagons to the egla arufa? Well, it's the same word. Agalot and egla, it's the same word. One's plural, but one's singular. It's the same word. But even more so, not only is it the same word, but it's the same concept. The sin of the egla arufa is you didn't escort that person, and that person died because you didn't let people know that this person's with you, and they need to be careful. Escorting. And this mitzvah as well is, I've sent these wagons for you so that people will know that you're with me, and nobody will bother you on your journey from Canaan to Egypt. So not only is it the same word, it's the same mitzvah. And all of a sudden, now you say, well, wow, there are a lot of different facts that add up to make this point. Then you see other things like, okay, well, Rachel died when they got to the border, and Lot was eating matzah, and you start to say, wait, well, wow, maybe they did know some of the mitzvahs. Let me just give you one last example. When Abraham welcomes the 3 guests, he tells Ishmael, go prepare the meat, and then he serves milk and meat together. Right? He brings them the curds, and then he brings them the meat. And the rabbis say, kashrus! I don't know if they said it like that. I don't think that wasn't until like the 1700s with the shaking. But it's not kosher. How can you serve milk and meat at the same time? So the rabbis have to do their, gyrations to figure out how we're going to. So the first thing is, you're allowed to have milk before meat. Right? You're allowed to. So he served the milk, then he cleared the dishes, and then he served the meat. But the real understanding is, angels don't keep mitzvahs because they're not human. The mitzvahs are for Jews. Angels aren't Jewish. I mean, they prefer Judaism to some of the other, but they're angels are not human beings. You have to be a human being to be a Jew. They don't keep kosher. They don't eat. So the way that we know that Abraham knew that they were angels and not people was by serving them non-kosher food to show these aren't people, because if they were, I would never serve them milk and meat at the same time, because you're not allowed to do that. So, okay. So, in a nutshell, I think what we can say is what brought Jacob ultimate joy and allowed him to return to prophecy was to see that not only was his son alive, but his son remembered Torah, and his son, even in a den of idolatry like Egypt, was living a Jewish life. And why was this so important? Because of Goshen. What was Goshen? Goshen was the place that the Jews were going to live in Egypt while they were slaves. And if Joseph and Jacob couldn't set up a Jewish community in the diaspora, where the Jews are about to be slaves for 210 years, then that's the end of Judaism. And the reason why Jacob ultimately had to leave Egypt and why Joseph had to stay in Egypt was because if they weren't able to set up a paradigm for how to live as Jews in the land of Egypt, then the Jews would have assimilated into Egypt like they did, like the 10 lost tribes did into Assyria, and that would have been the end of Judaism. So in a nutshell, what you see here is this relationship between Jacob and Joseph set up Goshen, which is what saved Judaism. Otherwise, we would have been enveloped into Egypt, and no one would ever heard from us ever again. So a lot going on here. Okay, Shabbat Shalom.
protection, right? You never go alone. There's the community ownership, and it is the father sending escort. And this is, I got really excited about it, and I wanted to tell you, and I couldn't. Okay, Mom, very fine. Nobody will miss it. Well, maybe they will miss it. Only to surprise you.
Safe travels home.
Apparently, I can't go to heaven on that one. Very good deeds. This is very disappointing.
Doesn't
news.
work like that. Sorry about that. But because you played Bethlehem basketball.
There you go. Thank you. Shabbat shalom.
Is this your coffee?
I'm confused when I got off.
Oh, that's Diana's coffee.
That's mine, Papa.